forcing Speaker Johnson's hand on the Epstein investigation. In a major escalation tonight, the Attorney General of Arizona and Congresswoman-elect Adelita Grijalva of Arizona are suing Mike Johnson, and they're suing him because Grijalva has not been sworn in. So what does all this have to do with Jeffrey Epstein? Because it does at its heart. Grijalva is the final vote needed for a bipartisan maneuver called a discharge petition that goes around Johnson. Because he does not want a vote to release the full Epstein files. This would go around him, get that vote to release the files. Grijalva was elected in Arizona 28 days ago, a whole month. And Johnson has, in that time, used every excuse not to swear her in.
Look, we'll schedule it, I guess, as soon as she wants. It has nothing to do with...
As soon as the Democrats vote to reopen the government...
She deserves to have all the pomp and circumstance that everybody else does. Have her family and friends in the balcony.
But,
so if she flies in her family, would you guys do it?
She'll get the full bells and whistles. It hasn't been scheduled because we don't schedule things for pro forma.
Okay, so imagine you're Mike Johnson. You're the Speaker of the House. You're supposed to be leading the Republican Party in Congress. You're supposed to be keeping your caucus united and getting legislation passed. And instead, everything is falling apart around you. You've got Democrats accusing you of stonewalling transparency. You've got MAGA Republicans furious that you're not fighting hard enough. You've got internal GOP chaos over spending deals and government shutdowns. You've got the Epstein files controversy blowing up in your face. You've got viral videos of Democrats confronting you on the House floor. You've got leaked group chats exposing toxic behavior in your party. And you've got people openly questioning whether you're going to survive as Speaker. Can you imagine the stress, the pressure, the absolute nightmare of trying to hold together a fractured party while fighting battles on a dozen different fronts? That's Mike Johnson's reality right now. And honestly, it's getting worse by the day because this isn't just political disagreement. This is full-blown chaos. This is a party eating itself alive while the whole country watches. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
She doesn't know how it works around here.
Well, putting the condescension aside, she does know she's supposed to be sworn in. That, of course, is democracy 101, right? You get elected by the people of your state and you get sworn in. That's democracy. And tonight, the Arizona Attorney General, Chris Mays, whom I'll be speaking to in just a moment, writes, and I quote, in this lawsuit, Speaker Johnson has not identified any valid reason for refusing to promptly seat Ms. Grijalva. Instead, on information and belief, Speaker Johnson wishes to delay seating Ms. Grijalva to prevent her from signing a discharge petition that would force a vote on the release of the Epstein files. And just a few moments ago, Johnson just responded.
I think it's patently absurd. We run the House. She has no jurisdiction. We're following the precedent. She's looking for national publicity. Apparently she's gotten some of it, but good luck with that.
Johnson on defense, and it is not just because of this specific lawsuit that was just filed. It is actually because Republicans, members of his own party in the House, are speaking out because many of them want the Epstein files released now, and they know that Grijalva's vote is the key to that.
Here's what's been happening. Johnson tried to control the Epstein files situation by delaying the vote, by keeping the House closed, by not swearing in a Democratic congressman who pledged to force a vote on releasing the files. He thought he could bottle it up, prevent it from becoming a public fight, protect Trump and other Republicans who might be embarrassed by what's in those files. But it backfired spectacularly. Because Democrats went nuclear, they started holding press conferences, releasing documents, building public pressure, and Republicans started breaking ranks, saying they supported releasing the files too. And suddenly Johnson's delaying tactics made him look like he was covering something up, like he was more interested in protecting powerful people than in transparency. So he had to cave, had to announce the vote would happen, had to watch as the House moved toward releasing files he desperately wanted to keep buried. And now he looks weak, like he can't control his own chamber, like Democrats can force his hand and his own party won't back him up. But the Epstein files are just one part of Johnson's nightmare. There's also the government shutdown fight. Republicans can't agree on a spending deal. Some want deep cuts, others want to protect certain programs. Some are willing to compromise with Democrats. Others say any compromise is betrayal. And Johnson's stuck in the middle trying to find a path that keeps government funded without losing his speakership. Because if he cuts a deal with Democrats, the MAGA wing revolts. If he refuses to compromise, government shuts down and voters blame Republicans. There's no winning move, just different ways to lose. And while Johnson's trying to navigate this impossible situation, Democrats are attacking him publicly. There was this viral moment where Representative Chrissy Houlihan confronted Johnson during a press conference, just walked up and started shouting him down about his refusal to negotiate in good faith, accusing him of partisan gridlock. And Johnson stood there looking uncomfortable while cameras rolled and the whole thing went viral on social media. That's humiliating. That's the kind of thing that makes you look weak and ineffective. And it's happened multiple times. Democrats have figured out that confronting Johnson publicly, putting him on the spot, makes for great viral content and puts pressure on him politically. Then you've got the internal GOP drama. The MAGA faction is furious with Johnson for various reasons. They think he's not fighting hard enough for Trump, not aggressive enough in investigating Democrats, not willing enough to use hardball tactics, and they're making that frustration known through social media, through interviews, through threats to vote against him as Speaker. Meanwhile, more moderate Republicans think the MAGA wing is destroying the party, making it impossible to govern, driving away moderate voters, and they want Johnson to stand up to the extremists. So Johnson's getting attacked from both sides. The far right says he's not MAGA enough. The center right says he's letting the crazies run wild, and he can't satisfy either faction without enraging the other. That's an unsustainable position, and people are starting to openly speculate about how long Johnson can last as Speaker, whether he's going to face a challenge, whether he'll even survive through 2026. And to make matters worse, there are these leaked group chats from MAGA-aligned activists and young Republican groups showing really toxic, extreme rhetoric, racist comments, praise for Hitler, all kinds of inflammatory stuff, and Johnson had to denounce it publicly, had to distance himself from groups that are supposedly part of his coalition. But that just made the far right even angrier at him. They accused him of throwing allies under the bus, of caring more about media criticism than about standing with Trump supporters. So even when Johnson tries to do the right thing, even when he condemns genuinely awful behavior, it backfires politically. He can't win. Every move he makes creates new problems. Every attempt to solve one crisis generates two more. He's in a political death spiral, trying desperately to hold on to power while everything around him collapses. And the worst part, this is all happening right as we head into 2026, with midterm elections approaching, with Republicans needing to present a unified front if they want to win, but instead they're publicly fractured, visibly chaotic, led by a speaker who looks increasingly ineffective and overwhelmed. That's terrible for the party's electoral prospects, and it's a nightmare for Mike Johnson personally. Let's break down how we got here and where this is headed. All right, so let's dive deeper into Mike Johnson's nightmare and understand how someone in such a powerful position ended up in such a weak political situation, because this didn't happen overnight. This is the result of systemic problems in the Republican Party that have been building for years, and Johnson's speakership is where all those problems are coming to a head. First, let's talk about the structural problem Johnson faces. He has one of the smallest House majorities in modern history. Republicans control the House, but just barely. That means Johnson can only afford to lose a handful of votes on any given bill. And with Republicans deeply divided, that's a constant problem. The MAGA faction wants one thing, the moderate faction wants something else, and there aren't enough votes to pass either faction's preferred bills. So Johnson's forced to negotiate with Democrats to get anything passed. But negotiating with Democrats infuriates the MAGA wing. They see any compromise as betrayal, as evidence that Johnson's not really one of them, that he's part of the establishment swamp that Trump ran against. So Johnson's in this impossible position where governing requires working with Democrats, but working with Democrats threatens his position as Speaker. And the MAGA faction has shown they're willing to follow through on threats. We saw this with Kevin McCarthy. He was Speaker before Johnson, and the MAGA wing voted to remove him because they didn't think he was fighting hard enough for their agenda. That precedent hangs over Johnson constantly. He knows that if he pisses off the wrong people, they can remove him just like they removed McCarthy. So he's constantly trying to appease the MAGA faction, giving them what they want on investigations, on messaging, on symbolic votes. But appeasing them often means not governing effectively, because the MAGA faction's demands are frequently unrealistic. They want spending cuts that would never pass the Senate. They want investigations that won't produce results. They want confrontational tactics that don't actually achieve policy goals. And when Johnson tries to be realistic, when he tries to find achievable compromises, they accuse him of selling out. Now let's talk specifically about the Epstein files situation and why it became such a crisis for Johnson. The push to release the Epstein files has bipartisan support. A lot of Americans, regardless of politics, want to know who was connected to Epstein and what those connections entailed. There's a legitimate transparency argument for releasing the files, but Johnson tried to prevent the vote from happening. Why? because he knew that releasing the files would embarrass Trump and potentially other Republicans. The files allegedly show extensive connections between Epstein and Trump. They might reveal communications or activities that contradict Trump's public statements about barely knowing Epstein, and Trump's made clear he doesn't want certain information released. So Johnson, as a Trump ally, tried to protect him by preventing the vote, but that strategy backfired in multiple ways. First, it made Johnson look like he was covering up for Trump, like he was putting partisan loyalty over transparency and accountability. Second, it galvanized Democrats. They saw Johnson trying to block the vote and went on offense. They started releasing teaser information, holding press conferences, building public pressure, making this a major story. Third, some Republicans broke ranks. They said publicly that they supported releasing the files, that Americans deserve to know the truth, that transparency matters even when it's politically uncomfortable. And once Republicans started defecting, Johnson's position became untenable. He couldn't hold the line anymore. He had to allow the vote, but by then the damage was done. He looked weak for trying to block it and then caving. And he looked suspect for even trying to prevent transparency in the first place. Now let's talk about the government shutdown fight, which is another major source of Johnson's problems. Republicans are divided on spending. Some want massive cuts to shrink government. Others want to protect specific programs that benefit their districts. Some are willing to negotiate. Others refuse to compromise at all. And this division makes it almost impossible to pass a budget or continuing resolution to fund government. Johnson's tried multiple approaches. He's tried passing Republican-only bills that satisfy the MAGA faction, but those bills can't get through the Senate or pass a presidential veto. He's tried negotiating with Democrats on compromise bills, but those negotiations infuriate the MAGA wing, who see any compromise as surrender. And he's tried using deadlines and pressure to force his caucus together, but the factions are so entrenched that pressure tactics don't work anymore, so we keep lurching toward government shutdowns. The government gets funded through short-term continuing resolutions that satisfy no one and solve nothing. And each crisis makes Johnson look more ineffective, more unable to lead his caucus or pass meaningful legislation. The viral confrontation with Representative Houlihan is also significant because it shows how Democrats have figured out how to put Johnson on the spot. Houlihan walked up during a Johnson press conference and started directly challenging him, calling him out for not negotiating in good faith, for refusing to compromise on keeping government funded. And Johnson didn't have a good response. He looked uncomfortable, caught off guard, defensive, and the whole thing was captured on video and went viral. That kind of public confrontation is political gold for Democrats. It makes Johnson look weak and ineffective. It shows Republicans as the party of chaos and dysfunction, and it generates media coverage that reinforces negative narratives about Republican leadership. And Democrats have figured out they can keep doing this, keep publicly challenging Johnson, keep putting him in uncomfortable positions, keep generating viral moments that damage his credibility. And Johnson doesn't have great options for responding. If he ignores the confrontations, he looks weak. If he responds aggressively, he risks looking unprofessional or thin-skinned. There's no good way to handle public callouts like that when you're already in a weak political position. Now let's talk about the internal MAGA drama and the leaked group chats. Far-right groups affiliated with MAGA and the Republican Party had group chats where members posted really extreme stuff, racist comments, anti-Semitic content, praise for Hitler and other authoritarian figures. And when these chats leaked, there was understandable outrage. Johnson had to respond. He had to denounce the rhetoric and distance himself from the groups. But that created a problem because some of these groups and their members are part of the MAGA coalition. They're Trump supporters. They're activists who organize rallies and get out the vote. And when Johnson condemned them, he was essentially attacking part of his own base. So the far right got mad at him for not having their backs, for caving to media pressure and liberal outrage. And moderate Republicans and independents got mad at him for not doing more to purge extremism from the party. So once again, Johnson ended up caught in the middle, satisfying no one while taking fire from all sides. This gets at a fundamental problem for Republicans right now. The party has an extremism problem. There are elements of the MAGA movement that embrace really toxic ideologies, racism, anti-Semitism, authoritarianism, conspiracy theories, and party leaders like Johnson are caught between denouncing that extremism, which angers the far right, or tolerating it, which disgusts moderate voters and makes the party unelectable outside of deep red districts. It's a no-win situation, and Johnson's handling of it has been inconsistent and ineffective. He denounces extremism when it becomes too embarrassing to ignore, but he doesn't take systematic action to address the problem. So the extremists stay in the coalition, and the cycle repeats every few months when something new gets exposed. There's also the question of Johnson's relationship with Trump. Johnson's been a loyal Trump ally. He defended Trump during impeachment. He supported Trump's election fraud claims. He's tried to use his position as Speaker to advance Trump's agenda and protect Trump from investigations, but that loyalty is now creating problems because Trump's legal troubles keep generating scandals that splash back on Johnson and House Republicans. The Epstein files, the classified documents, the election interference cases. Every Trump scandal creates a mess that Johnson has to manage, and managing those messes requires Johnson to make choices that anger parts of his caucus. If he tries to protect Trump, he looks like he's covering up wrongdoing. If he doesn't protect Trump, the MAGA wing accuses him of betrayal. So Johnson's trapped by his own loyalty. He tied himself to Trump, thinking it would strengthen his position, but Trump's chaos keeps creating problems that weaken Johnson politically, and there's no easy way out. Johnson can't suddenly distance himself from Trump without destroying his relationship with the MAGA base. But continuing to defend Trump requires defending increasingly indefensible behavior. It's a political death spiral, where loyalty to Trump creates crisis after crisis that undermines Johnson's effectiveness and standing. Now let's talk about what all of this means for Republicans heading into 2026. The party is deeply divided, visibly chaotic, led by a speaker who looks weak and overwhelmed. That's terrible for electoral prospects because voters don't reward dysfunction. They don't vote for parties that can't govern. And right now, Republicans look like they can't govern. They can barely fund government. They're fighting public battles with each other. They're embroiled in scandals. They're led by people who seem more interested in loyalty to Trump than in actually accomplishing anything. That's a losing message, and Democrats are going to exploit it mercilessly. Okay, so let's break down what Mike Johnson's nightmare actually means for him personally, for Republicans as a party, and for American politics more broadly. First thing, Johnson's speakership is hanging by a thread. He's facing opposition from multiple directions. MAGA Republicans who think he's not aggressive enough. Moderate Republicans who think he's letting extremists run wild. Democrats who figured out they can embarrass him publicly. And all of this is happening with a tiny House majority that gives him almost no margin for error. If even a handful of Republicans turn on him, he loses his speakership. And the precedent is already there. Kevin McCarthy got removed. The MAGA faction has shown they're willing to oust speakers who don't meet their standards. So Johnson's constantly looking over his shoulder, constantly trying to appease the factions that might vote against him. And that defensive crouch makes him look weak and ineffective, which creates more pressure, which makes his position even more precarious. It's a vicious cycle. Second thing, Johnson's problems reflect deeper structural issues in the Republican Party. The party is fundamentally divided between MAGA loyalists and more traditional conservatives, between people who want confrontation and those who want to govern, between those who care only about loyalty to Trump and those who care about policy and electoral success. And these divisions can't be bridged through normal political negotiation because they're not really about policy, they're about identity, about what it means to be a Republican, about whether the party is Trump's personal vehicle or a governing coalition with broader goals. Johnson can't solve that identity crisis. No speaker could. The party has to resolve it for themselves. But until they do, any speaker is going to face the same impossible situation Johnson's in now, caught between irreconcilable factions, unable to satisfy both sides, constantly at risk of being removed. Third thing, the Epstein files vote represents a massive political defeat for Johnson. He tried to prevent transparency. He tried to protect Trump and other Republicans from embarrassment, and he failed completely. Not only did the vote happen, but Johnson's attempt to block it made him look guilty, made it seem like Republicans have something to hide. And now, when those files are released, when they reveal whatever connections exist between Epstein and Trump, Republicans are going to take the political hit, but they'll also have to answer questions about why Johnson tried so hard to prevent release, why transparency was treated as a threat rather than a principle worth defending. That's going to be brutal politically. It reinforces every negative narrative about Republicans protecting the powerful and avoiding accountability. Fourth thing, the government shutdown chaos shows that Republicans can't govern even when they control the House. They can't agree among themselves on basic functions like funding government. They can't pass budgets. They can barely pass continuing resolutions. And this dysfunction has real consequences. It creates economic uncertainty. It threatens federal services. It makes America look chaotic and ungovernable to the rest of the world. And voters see this. They see Republicans fighting among themselves while nothing gets done, and they're going to hold Republicans accountable in 2026. Fifth thing, the viral confrontations with Democrats are changing the dynamic in Congress. Traditionally, there's been a certain decorum, a level of respect between members even when they disagree. But Democrats have figured out that confronting Johnson publicly, calling him out in ways that generate viral moments, is effective. It damages him politically, it puts Republicans on defense, and it creates content that energizes Democratic voters and persuades independents. So we're probably going to see more of this, more public callouts, more viral moments, more breaking of traditional norms around congressional behavior, And Republicans don't have a good counter strategy because when you're already in a weak position, public confrontations just make you look weaker. Johnson can't win these exchanges. He can only try to avoid them, but Democrats have figured out how to force them anyway. Sixth thing, the leaked group chats and extremism problem are existential threats to the Republican Party's ability to win elections outside of safe red districts. Because moderate voters, independent, suburban women, the voters Republicans need to win swing districts and statewide races, they're repelled by extremism, by racism, by anti-Semitism, by praise for authoritarians. When these things get associated with the Republican brand, it drives those voters away. And Johnson's inability to effectively address the extremism problem makes it worse, because his weak responses suggest the party tolerates extremism as long as it's not too embarrassing, that the party cares more about keeping the MAGA base happy than about standing for principles or appealing to a majority of voters. That's politically toxic, and it's going to cost Republicans elections. Seventh thing, Johnson's loyalty to Trump is becoming a liability rather than an asset. Early in his speakership, being seen as a Trump ally helped Johnson with the MAGA faction, but now Trump's legal problems are so extensive, his behavior so chaotic, that defending him requires defending the indefensible, and that makes Johnson look unprincipled, like he cares more about loyalty to one person than about governing or principles. Voters see that. They see Johnson contorting himself to protect Trump even when Trump's behavior is clearly wrong, and it damages Johnson's credibility and the Republican brand more broadly. At some point, loyalty becomes complicity, and Johnson's getting dangerously close to that line if he hasn't already crossed it. Eighth thing, let's talk about what happens if Johnson loses his speakership. Who would replace him? The logical candidates are either more MAGA-aligned figures who would satisfy the far right but alienate moderates, or more moderate figures who moderates would support but the MAGA wing would reject. So replacing Johnson doesn't solve the underlying problem, it just moves the dysfunction to a different person. And the process of removing a speaker and electing a new one is itself chaotic and embarrassing. Remember when McCarthy was removed? It took weeks to elect Johnson as his replacement. Multiple failed votes, public infighting, the whole world watching Republicans unable to elect their own leader. If that happens again, it's devastating for the party. It reinforces every narrative about Republican dysfunction and chaos. So Johnson's probably going to try to hang on, going to keep trying to appease all factions, going to keep stumbling from crisis to crisis, because the alternative, being removed, is even worse for him and for the party. But that means more of what we're seeing now, more chaos, more public fights, more viral confrontations, more scandals, more dysfunction, and all of that damages Republicans electorally, makes it harder to win in 2026, makes the party look unfit to govern. Ninth thing, the media's role in all of this is significant because the media loves conflict and chaos, and Johnson's providing both in abundance. So every confrontation gets amplified, every leaked chat gets wall-to-wall coverage, every scandal dominates news cycles, and that creates a feedback loop where the dysfunction generates coverage, which generates more pressure, which generates more dysfunction. Johnson can't escape the media spotlight, can't have a quiet period to regroup and stabilize, because journalists and commentators are constantly analyzing every move, every misstep, every sign of weakness, and social media makes it worse, because viral moments spread instantly. Millions of people see Johnson getting confronted or looking weak or struggling to answer questions, and those moments shape public perception more than any press release or prepared statement ever could. So where does this leave Mike Johnson? He's in a nightmare scenario where he's under attack from all sides, where every move creates new problems, where his speakership hangs by a thread, and where his party is so divided that effective leadership is nearly impossible. Can he survive? Maybe. He survived this long by constantly shifting, constantly appeasing, constantly trying to thread impossible needles. But survival isn't the same as success. Johnson's not governing effectively. He's not strengthening his party. He's not building toward electoral victories. He's just trying to make it through each day without being removed. That's not leadership. That's survival mode. And it's not sustainable long term. At some point, either Johnson's going to get removed or he's going to become so ineffective that his speakership is meaningless even if he keeps the title. Either way, this is a disaster for Republicans. A party that can't even maintain stable leadership in the House is a party that's not ready to govern, and voters are going to notice. Welcome to Mike Johnson's nightmare, where being Speaker of the House feels more like being trapped in quicksand, where every struggle just pulls you deeper, where there's no clear path to safety or success, just endless chaos, endless attacks, and a slow political death spiral that might end in removal or might just continue indefinitely as the party tears itself apart. Either way, it's brutal to watch, and it's only getting worse. Stay tuned because this speakership is a train wreck in slow motion, and we're all watching it happen in real time.